The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The library did not sleep. Every other room in Hogwarts went quiet after hours, the Great Hall settling into its stones, the classrooms exhaling chalk dust and potion smoke, the dormitories softening under the weight of sleeping children. But the library stayed awake. The books did not permit otherwise. Some shifted in the dark. One, in the far left corner of the third row, had been slowly consuming its neighbor for years, and it worked best after midnight. Past the reference section, where the respectable texts stood with the composure of things that had never needed to bite anyone. Past the first row of the restricted section, where a volume bound in gray suede tracked movement with something approximate to attention. Past a book that was definitely pacing. And then the shelf that did not quite fit. 2 inches. The gap was 2 inches, placed by someone who knew the shelving around it would never notice a 2-inch discrepancy, because the shelving around it had other things to think about. The book at eye level on this shelf did not twitch or mutter. It breathed. In, out, a slow, steady expansion and contraction of the spine. The leather moved like a ribcage. The book was not waiting for someone to open it. It was waiting for 2 specific people to arrive at the same time. Harry came first. He had been coming to the library every week since the 3rd week of term. Not because anyone told him to. Not because he had an essay due. He came because the Dursleys had spent 10 years ensuring the only books available to him were Dudley's cast-off school texts, and the Hogwarts library was the first place Harry had ever walked into where, every direction he looked, someone had written something down because they believed it was worth knowing. He stood in front of the 2-inch gap with his head tilted, looking at the breathing book the way he looked at things that interested him, quietly, without hurry, as if the looking itself was a form of conversation. Hermione arrived 7 minutes later. She had a note. Professor Dumbledore had signed it at the start of term for general research purposes, because she had asked very politely and arrived at his office with 3 arguments for why a first year might legitimately need access, organized in descending order of persuasiveness. The note was folded in her left breast pocket. She carried it the way someone carries something they may or may not need. Present, but not anxious about it. She stopped when she saw him. She tracked his eyeline to the shelf. She saw the gap. She saw the book. She stood beside him and watched it. "You shouldn't be in here without a note," she said. "I know," Harry said. "What do you think that book is doing?" She looked at it for a long moment. "Breathing," she said. Yeah, neither of them moved. The book continued its slow rhythm between them, in, out, and the restricted sections settled around this small stillness, the way dark water settles around 2 stones dropped close together. "I'm Hermione," she said. "Hermione Granger, Harry Potter," he said. She had known who he was for 7 weeks. She had been waiting for a moment that wouldn't go awkward. This one, in the restricted section, in front of a book that was breathing at them, did not feel like it was going to. She looked at the binding. 4 symbols pressed into the leather, arranged in pairs. Her eyes moved to them in the order 2 months of runic study had trained her, structural first, relational second. "We should both touch it at the same time," she said. "That's what the magic is waiting for. Look at the binding, those are the 4 founder glyphs. It's keyed to a pair." "How can you tell?" he said. "The glyphs are arranged in 2 pairs of 2, Gryffindor and Ravenclaw on the left, Slytherin and Hufflepuff on the right. It's a balanced configuration," she said. "I read Runes Through the Ages last month." Chapter 12. "Of course you did," Harry said. There was nothing in it that wasn't warm. He held out his left hand. She looked at it for 1 second, not hesitating, but registering the weight of what this was, and placed her right hand beside his on the spine. The book did not open. The wall opened. The door was cut from a single piece of granite so old it had gone black. No hinge, no handle. It had simply been there, behind the shelf, behind the book, behind the 2-inch gap, waiting with the patience of something placed by people who understood that 1,000 years was not, ultimately, very long. On the door, 4 symbols: a sword, a cup, a serpent, a diadem. Above them a line of rune script so precise it looked less carved than remembered. Hermione translated it in 4 seconds, not by deed, but by blood and understanding, she said quietly. Harry looked at her. She looked at him. They pushed the door open together. The room beyond was larger than it had any right to be, larger than the library above it. It was lit from 4 corners, deep crimson from the northeast, warm gold from the northwest, cool sapphire from the southeast, and an emerald so dark it was almost black from the southwest, and where the 4 lights met at the center, they neither mixed nor competed. They coexisted, each one distinct, each one steady. At the center, a table of black stone. On the table, a map, not of England. Of the castle itself, every corridor, every staircase, every room rendered in lines of light that shifted and updated as they watched. Dozens of tiny points of brightness moved through it, each one a person going about their night in complete ignorance of 2 11-year-olds standing in a room 1,000 years old, watching them. Harry looked at the map for a long time. Hermione was looking at the 4 alcoves set into the walls, one in each corner, each containing a pedestal, each pedestal holding an object she didn't yet have words for. She read the inscriptions above each alcove in order. Her expression did something complicated and went still. On the central table, beside the map, was a book she hadn't noticed until now. Small, bound in silver-threaded leather. She picked it up. On the cover, in the same rune script as the door, the Charter of the Architects. Laws of the Sovereign Pair. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, which was less than it should have been, and more than she expected. "Harry," she said quietly. He looked up from the map. He looked at the book. He looked at the room. "I think," she said carefully, "we own this castle." On the living map, 2 lights pulsed at the center of the vault, one gold, one silver, brighter than anything else on the map. The castle had been waiting 1,000 years to show someone. It showed them. They sat on the floor. There were chairs, 4 of them, carved from the same black stone as the table, set at cardinal points around the room. Harry and Hermione did not sit in the chairs. They sat on the floor beside the central table with the charter open between them, Hermione cross-legged with the silver-threaded book in her lap, Harry with his knees drawn up and his back against the table's leg, the living map glowing above them both like a window into the castle's own mind. Hermione read aloud. Harry listened and asked questions. She noticed within the first 20 minutes that he never asked how a thing worked. He always asked why. The why questions cut to the constitutional logic of the Charter faster than any how question could, because the Charter was not an instruction manual. It was a document written by 4 people who had built something they believed in and wanted to survive them. You could not understand it by reading it mechanically. You had to understand what they were afraid of losing. Harry understood this instinctively. She filed that away. They had been in the vault for perhaps an hour when the map changed. One of the lights on the 3rd floor began to move differently, heavier, slower, the wrong shape for a person. Then a distant sound reached them, muffled by 2 levels of stone. A thump. Then another. Then the high, bright crack of something breaking that wasn't glass. Harry sat up. "Troll," Hermione said, without looking up from the Charter. She had read Hogwarts, a history twice, and the chapter on historical castle breaches once. "Mountain troll. Fully grown. The weight distribution is wrong for anything else that size." Harry was already looking at the map. He found the creature, a smear of sickly amber light lurching through the third-floor corridor. Then he found the two dots he was looking for. Two lights converging on a girl's bathroom, moving with the specific urgency of people who had just realized something was very wrong. "Is that us?" he said. "If we were up there, I mean." "It would be," Hermione said, not looking up. "If we were up there." Right. The amber smear continued its lurch. Then 3 other lights converged on it from different directions. One moving with the decisive speed of someone who knew exactly where to go in a crisis. One with the careful deliberateness of someone following a plan they had been running for weeks. One with the frantic zigzag of someone pursuing a private agenda that happened to intersect with both. McGonagall, Snape, Quirrell, the troll was redirected. Contained, the amber smear slowed and stopped. The bright lights dispersed. Everything resolved with a tidiness that made it look almost administrative. Harry watched until the map was calm again. He had spent the last 10 years moving toward problems because there was no one else. It was not heroism. It was arithmetic. A problem existed, no one else was handling it, therefore he handled it. The arithmetic had never offered him a third option. The map had just shown him one. Other people handled it. No one died. The arithmetic still worked. He sat back against the table leg and let the feelings settle. It felt, distantly, like the first morning after a long illness when you wake up and the fever is gone and you can't quite believe the absence of it. "Find the section on the ward stone," he said. Hermione turned 4 pages. "Already there," she said. They returned every evening for the next 7 days. Hermione translated the full charter by the 4th night, not just the Regency Clause, but the constitutional architecture around it, the legal definitions, the procedural precedents, the footnotes that contained more substantive law than the main text. She built a separate set of notes in the margins of her own parchment, cross-referencing the charter's terminology against modern wizarding legal documents she had read before term started, because she had thought it might be useful to understand how the current system worked before she arrived in it. Harry read the charter through 3 times in full. He had a habit of returning to the same passages, not the ones about power, but the ones about purpose. A line in the 7th section read, in Hermione's translation, "The regent does not own the school in the manner of property. The regent tends it in the manner of a trust." He came back to that line on the 2nd night, and the 3rd, and did not mention it to Hermione. She noticed, anyway. On the 7th night, they descended. A staircase had appeared in the floor of the vault on the 4th night, after Hermione read Chapter 4 aloud, a clean spiral of the same black granite, going down into a light quieter than the vault's 4-color aurora. The light of a thing that had not been active for a very long time and was not yet sure it was going to be. The wardstone chamber was smaller than the vault. No map, no alcoves, no table, just the stone itself at the center, 6 feet across, roughly spherical, its surface the gray of old winter sky. Dormant, the air around it carried the sensation of standing in front of something that was deciding about you. They stood at the edge and looked at it. "The charter says we both have to be willing," Harry said. "Not just able." "Willing, I know what willing means, Harry," she said. "I'm asking if you are," he said. Hermione was quiet. She looked at the stone. She thought, with the honesty she reserved for questions she asked herself rather than questions she asked aloud, about what willing actually required here. She had spent 11 years being the person who did everything correctly, who followed the rules so well that the rules began to feel like a form of safety. Being a regent meant taking responsibility for rules most of the wizarding world did not know existed. It meant stepping outside the system she had studied so carefully and becoming, in some formal and irrevocable sense, something the system could not classify. She had never wanted to be classified. She had wanted to be understood. Those were not the same thing. "I'm willing," she said. "Are you?" "Yeah," Harry said. "I've been willing since I read the sentence about the Board of Governors. They crossed the chamber. They placed their hands on the ward stone. The surface warmed first. The sapphire came, slow and deep, bleeding up through the stone like ink through water. It found Hermione's hand and settled around it with the quality of something recognizing rather than reacting. Then the crimson, moving to Harry's hand with the same deliberate patience. Then, fainter, the emerald, threading through the stone's lower hemisphere. Not his by birthright, but by transfer. A wound that had become a bridge. The emerald acknowledged it without judgment. Then, the gold. It came from somewhere deeper than the other three colors, slower, the last thing to wake, and the hardest to reach. When it broke the surface, it did not go to Harry's hand or Hermione's hand separately. It wrapped around both their hands at once. Warm, steady, not about bloodlines or intellect or magical ability. It read the bond itself, 7 weeks of library evenings, 7 nights on the floor of the vault with the charter open between them, the specific texture of 2 people who had found in each other something they had not known they were missing, and had immediately, without discussion, begun to rely on it. The stone did not care about lineage. The bond was genuine. The gold said so. The 4 colors merged. The silver-white aurora filled the chamber. And then Harry felt the castle. Not as metaphor. He felt it the way you feel a heartbeat when you are very close to someone, a deep, slow pulse, once every 4 seconds, moving through the stone beneath his feet, and the walls around him, and the air he was breathing. The castle had a pulse, patient and enormous and very old, and woven through it were the presences of everyone inside the grounds. Neville Longbottom in the greenhouse, coaxing a listing plant upright with focused, quiet hands. Dumbledore in his office, frowning at a silver instrument that had begun, without explanation, to behave incorrectly. And Quirrell in the defense classroom, 1 floor below where he should have been at that hour, pacing with a frantic, looping energy that left something in the air behind it. Something that clung. Harry pulled his hand back. "Quirrell," he said. "I know," Hermione said. She had already released the stone. There's something wrapped around his magic. "Inside it," Harry said. They stood in the chamber with the aurora fading slowly around the stone, the 4 colors separating back into themselves, and they looked at each other in the quiet that followed. "We need to read more of the charter before we do anything," Hermione said. "Obviously," he said. But the pulse of the castle was still there, low and steady, just beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. The way your own heartbeat is there when you know to listen for it. The castle knew they could feel it. It had been waiting to be felt for 1,000 years. It was patient. It could wait a little longer. The map showed Quirrell going to the 3rd floor every night. Always the same corridor, always the same stopping point. The precise location of a trapdoor concealed beneath a locked door that the castle's own memory described as the entrance to Dumbledore's protection sequence. Quirrell would stand there for between 4 and 11 minutes. He would press his hand to the door. The door would not open. He would leave. "He's waiting for instruction," Hermione said. She was at the table in the vault, her notes arranged in the specific pattern she used when working through a problem, rather than toward a conclusion. Sources on the left, inferences in the center, open questions on the right. Whatever is inside him doesn't know how to get through without specific guidance. It's isolated. "Something happened on Halloween," Harry said. He was watching the map. On the living surface, Quirrell's light moved through the defense corridor with its characteristic wrong quality, a smear rather than a point, as if the castle's record-keeping couldn't quite decide how many entities to count. "Before we bonded to the stone. Something weakened it." "The troll," Hermione said, without looking up. Quirrell brought the troll in as a distraction. "It didn't work, and whatever is inside him lost something in the failure," Harry said. "It's been circling the same door for weeks and can't get through." "It's looking for the stone," Hermione said. "And the stone is already inside the mirror." Harry looked at her. "I worked it out last week," she said. in the tone she used when she had been sitting on information until it was useful rather than merely interesting. The final protection is a mirror. Dumbledore designed it so that only someone who wanted to find the stone but not use it could retrieve it. Elegant, actually. It defeats acquisition by desire almost perfectly. Almost, Harry said. Almost, she agreed. It doesn't account for someone who wants it for someone else's use. Quirrell's desire is intermediate, which means his reflection would show him with the stone but not using it. Which means he could get it, Harry said. Eventually, if he gets through the trapdoor. Which he can't yet, she said. We should remove it from the equation. Harry nodded slowly. He had been thinking about this. Not the removal. That part was straightforward. Once you understood that the castle knew where the stone was, and the castle answered to them. He had been thinking about what to do with it afterward. About who it belonged to. I wrote to Nicholas Flamel, he said. When? She said. Earlier this week. Through the castle's post, the charter has a provision for official regent correspondence. It carries the Hogwarts seal, he said. He's 665 years old. He doesn't move quickly. But he should have it back. It's his! Hermione regarded him for a moment. You wrote to Nicholas Flamel, she said before we'd decided what to do about the stone. I wrote to Nicholas Flamel, Harry said, because the stone belongs to Nicholas Flamel. The deciding came after. She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her quill, moved the note about the stone from the open questions column to the left side, and wrote Flamel, confirmed, ownership returning in her clearest hand. Right, she said. Then let's deal with Quirrell. The ward declaration went into the stone one evening near the end of term. They had drafted it together over 2 evenings. The language required precision because a regent declaration was not merely a command. It was a constitutional act. The ward stone, they had learned, could tell the difference. By the charter of the architects, they said, together, the individual known as Quirinus Quirrell, who carries within him a hostile consciousness that wishes harm upon the inhabitants of this school, is hereby banned from the grounds of Hogwarts. His position as a teacher is dissolved. The grounds will see him out. The stone's aurora deepened for 3 seconds. Then it faded back to its ordinary pulse. The castle went to work. It did not look like anything. That was the part Harry found most satisfying afterward. The castle's response to a formal regent declaration looked, from the outside, like a sequence of minor inconveniences so unremarkable that no single one would prompt suspicion. Quirrell's office door didn't open. His defense classroom door didn't open either. A back staircase curved, gradually and without any apparent decision point, toward the entrance hall. The entrance hall doors were open, as they always were in the evenings. Quirrell walked through them in the specific distracted manner of someone who has been dealing with minor inconveniences for 20 minutes and is now thinking about the next task on a mental list rather than the current one. By morning, Quirrell was outside the gates on the road to Hogsmeade, surrounded by his luggage, packed with a consideration for his belongings that made the whole thing feel, somehow, even more final. The thing wrapped around his magic knew exactly what had happened. It pressed against Quirrell's consciousness with cold, specific fury. Then, as the castle's ward boundary solidified at the perimeter, the pressing stopped. There was nothing to press against anymore. They left together, down the road, in the gray light. Dumbledore spent 2 days in his office with a collection of instruments that told him nothing useful. One of them, a small silver device that monitored disturbances in the castle's protective enchantments, had gone entirely haywire and had been producing a faint, steady tone that was neither an alarm nor a signal, but simply evidence that something had changed in the architecture of the castle's magic so fundamentally the instrument did not have a category for it. He wrote to Nicholas Flamel to inquire about the stone. Flamel's reply arrived 2 days later. The stone was fine. Flamel wrote, in fact, he had received a rather extraordinary letter from the Hogwarts regents, which he had not previously known existed, informing him of the situation and offering to arrange the stone's secure return at his convenience. He found the whole thing enormously reassuring and considerably overdue. The letter was sealed with the official Hogwarts charter seal, which Flamel, who had spent 6 centuries studying the history of magical institutions across Europe, recognized on sight and had long hoped to see used again. Dumbledore read this letter 3 times. He set it on his desk. He looked at the instruments. He looked at the letter again. He did not yet know about the vault, the ward stone, the charter, or the 2 first years who had spent 7 evenings building a constitutional framework that superseded his authority in ways he was only beginning to calculate. He knew his defense professor had departed the school overnight without triggering any standard alarms. He knew the stone appeared to be in contact with its rightful owner through channels he hadn't opened. He told himself there was an explanation. He told himself he would find it. In the Great Hall that evening, Harry ate his dinner, and Hermione read the next section of the Charter's governance protocols, with her book propped against the water jug. "We should probably address the Board of Governors at some point," Harry said. "Agreed," she said. She turned a page. "But let's let Dumbledore think he handled the Quirrell thing for a while. He needs the win." Harry considered this. It was the right call, not unkind, not cold, but accurate. Dumbledore had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and there was no reason to take a small weight off him just to replace it immediately with a larger one. "Right," he said, and finished his dinner. Outside, on the road to Hogsmeade, Quirrell did not look back at the castle. The castle was not thinking about him anymore. It had other things to tend. Lucius Malfoy arrived on a Tuesday. He filed his inspection notice at the precise legal minimum, 24 hours before arrival, a timing he had perfected over years of using the Ministry's own procedural calendar as a tool. It left Dumbledore enough time to be informed, but not enough time to prepare anything that might complicate the inspection's findings. It was, Lucius had always felt, one of his cleaner habits. He came through the gates in robes that cost more than most wizarding families spent on a year's worth of everything. His serpent-headed cane struck the path in a steady rhythm, not because he needed it, but because the sound it made on stone was useful. People heard it coming. People arranged themselves accordingly. Hagrid met him at the gates, which was the first small wrongness of the morning. Lucius had expected Dumbledore, or McGonagall at minimum. Hagrid smiled at him with the open goodwill of someone who genuinely did not register that he was supposed to feel inferior, which Lucius found more irritating than open hostility. Open hostility could be leveraged. Goodwill that didn't know its place simply stood there, enormous and cheerful, and offered to carry your bag. Lucius declined. He walked the path to the castle. The grounds were immaculate. Not in the ordinary sense. Hogwarts was always reasonably maintained, the work of house elves and a half-giant who took the outdoors personally. But today the grass held a quality that Lucius, who prided himself on noticing things, could not immediately name. It was the quality of a house that has been cleaned not for tidiness, but for a specific arrival. The stones of the castle's facade caught the morning light at an angle that made them look less weathered than he remembered. He slowed his pace by half a step. He resumed it. He was Lucius Malfoy. He did not slow his pace for buildings. The Great Hall held perhaps 200 students at breakfast, the younger years mostly, the low conversation of a school morning, settling into the vaulted ceiling the way it always did. Lucius entered without announcement and let the room arrange itself around his presence, as rooms generally did. Dumbledore stood at the staff table. The greeting was appropriately respectful. McGonagall's expression was appropriately neutral. Lucius allowed himself a moment of satisfaction at the familiar architecture of this encounter. He had been having this specific meeting, in this specific room, with these specific expressions greeting him, for the better part of a decade. He began his remarks in the center of the Great Hall. The defense situation reflected poorly on the school's staffing practices. Several board members had concerns about enrollment standards. The matter of the school's financial reporting for the previous year contained irregularities he intended to examine in detail. Dumbledore listened. He was extraordinarily good at listening in a way that gave nothing back, a quality Lucius respected professionally and found maddening personally. He was 3 sentences into the financial matters when Harry Potter stood up. No one stood up when Lucius Malfoy was speaking. It was not a rule anyone had written down. It was the kind of understanding that competent people arrived at without being told. Lucius turned to look at the first year who had apparently not arrived at it. The boy was slight, dark-haired, wearing robes that fit correctly but without distinction. He was not fidgeting. He was not performing bravery. Lucius knew what performed bravery looked like, had watched Gryffindors perform it at him for years. This was different. The boy was simply standing because he had decided to stand, and the decision appeared to have cost him nothing. "Excuse me," Harry said. "Are you a member of the Board of Governors?" Lucius looked at him for a long moment. He allowed the look to carry its full weight. "I am the chairman," he said. "Good," Harry said. "Hermione?" The girl who stood beside Harry Potter had a scroll of parchment she had clearly placed on the table before Lucius arrived. It was cream-colored and dense with text, and it had the age that could not be replicated, not yellowed or fragile but settled. The way very old documents settle into themselves and become more rather than less substantial with time. She set it on the table and looked at Lucius directly. "Mr. Malfoy," Hermione said, "I'd like to bring a matter before the board. Under Section 9 of the Hogwarts Founding Charter, which predates the Board of Governors by approximately 6 centuries, any individual who has used the governance structure of this school for personal financial gain, coerced fellow governors through threats or leverage, or introduced a harmful magical artifact into the school building is subject to immediate removal from the board by decree of the sitting regents." She placed one hand flat on the scroll. "This document outlines 3 separate violations. We are issuing the decree now." The hall was very quiet. Not the quiet of shock. Not yet. The quiet of 200 people simultaneously recalibrating what kind of morning this was going to be. At the Slytherin table, 3 rows away, Draco Malfoy had stopped eating. He was watching his father with an expression that had not yet decided what it was. Harry and Hermione spoke at the same time. They had practiced it until the synchronization was exact, not because the Wardstone Declaration required performance, but because it required precision, and precision under conditions like these meant the words had to live in the body rather than on a page. By the Charter of the Architects, Lucius Abraxas Malfoy is hereby removed from the Board of Governors of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. His seal is dissolved. His votes are nullified. He is henceforth recognized by this institution as a private citizen with no governing authority over this school. The sound moved through the great hall the way a very low note moves through a large space, not heard so much as felt in the sternum and the soles of the feet. The stone of the walls absorbed it and gave something back. Not an echo. An agreement. Lucius Malfoy's Board of Governors medallion, worn at his lapel in heavy brass with the Hogwarts crest embossed at its center. A crest he had looked at in mirrors for 11 years with the satisfaction of someone who owns something, went dull. Not gradually. Between one moment and the next. The crest did not fade so much as vacate. The brass remained. The authority it had represented simply was not there anymore. The way a word stops meaning something when you look at it too long, except this was not an illusion of perception. The medallion was just brass. It had always been just brass. The charter had simply stopped pretending otherwise. Lucius looked down at it. The silence in the hall stretched to 4 seconds. 5. He looked up. "Who," he said, very quietly, "are you?" "We're the owners of this building," Harry said. "You have 30 minutes to be off the grounds before the grounds ask you to leave more directly." He sat down. He picked up his fork. Lucius did not storm out. He was calculating. He was furious in the specific cold way that constructed things rather than destroyed them. But he had spent 40 years in rooms where power shifted, and he knew the sensation of a situation that had moved outside his management. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked back. His expression was appropriate to the gravity of the moment and contained, at a depth that required knowing him very well to detect, something that had not been there at the start of the morning. Something that resembled, faintly and uncomplicatedly, satisfaction. Lucius looked at the scroll on the table. He looked at the dull brass weight at his lapel. He looked at 2 first years eating breakfast with the composure of people who had done something ordinary. He turned and walked out of the great hall. The sound of his cane on the stone floor was the same rhythm as when he had arrived. He made certain of that. But the hall's acoustics were different now. The ceiling received the sound differently, or perhaps the stone beneath his feet did. A quality he could not identify, and would not be able to identify no matter how many legal experts he consulted in the following weeks. Because it was not a quality that legal experts were trained to hear. The castle was no longer presenting itself for his arrival. It was simply letting him leave. Draco Malfoy sat at the Slytherin table and did not look away from the doors his father had walked through. His porridge had gone cold. He had not noticed. He was filing something, a piece of information that did not fit into any category his 11 years had given him. Because none of those categories had included the possibility of watching Harry Potter tell his father he had 30 minutes to vacate the premises, and watching his father, after a long moment, comply, he looked at Harry Potter. Harry Potter was eating his breakfast. He looked at Hermione Granger, who had produced a document from somewhere and appeared to be reading it. She had not looked at Draco once during the entire proceeding. The scroll was open now beside her toast, and she was making notes in the margin with the focused attention of someone who considers the work more important than its audience. Draco filed this too. He did not know what to do with any of it yet. He picked up his spoon. The porridge was cold. He ate it anyway. He left the great hall before anyone spoke to him. He went to the second-floor corridor that he had found in September and that he had never told anyone about, because it had no strategic value and no audience, which meant it was simply a corridor, and sometimes that was what he needed. He stood in it for 11 minutes. His father had walked out. His father had been told to walk out by 2 people Draco's age, and his father had looked at them for a long moment and then walked out, and the sound of the serpent cane on the stone had been exactly the same rhythm leaving as arriving, because his father would not change his rhythm for anyone, and Draco had understood for the first time that this was not strength. He had always thought it was strength. He went to potions. He sat down. He did the work. He did not know yet what he was going to do with what he now knew. He suspected it would take a long time to find out. 3 weeks later, Pansy Parkinson asked him what he was going to do about it. She said it the way questions were asked in Slytherin, not quite a question. An invitation to confirm the obvious. They were in the common room after dinner, the fire going, 6 or 7 of them arranged in the specific formation of people who had known each other long enough to have designated seats. Draco had a potions text open that he was not reading. "About what?" he said. "Your father," she said. "The board seat. There are things that can be done." Theo's father was saying. "I know what Theo's father was saying," Draco said. A pause. The fire. The thing was, he did know. He had been hearing it since September. The machinery of it. The shape of the response his world expected him to want. His father would have something to say about what should be said and done. And Draco knew what his father would say. And he had spent the 3 weeks since the Great Hall working out whether he believed it. He didn't think he did. He did not know what he believed instead. That part was still dark, and he was not going to pretend otherwise, not even to himself, which was new. "I'm not doing anything about it," he said. Pansy looked at him. The fire moved. "Draco, I'm not doing anything about it," he said again, and looked back at his potions text, and the common room rearranged itself around this information in the way common rooms do, slowly, without announcement. He did not know what he was going to be. He knew that for the first time in his life he was the one who would decide. He kept reading. The memory pensieve turned slowly in its basin. It had been turning since the night they found the vault, a slow, clockwise rotation powered by nothing visible that simply continued with the patience of something set in motion a very long time ago and not given a reason to stop. The liquid was dark silver, almost black in the vault's low light, and occasionally an image surfaced the way images surface in still water, there for a moment, almost identifiable, then drawn back under before the mind could fully catch it. Harry and Hermione had been carefully not approaching it for 2 months. This was not avoidance. They had discussed it, twice, directly, in the specific way they discussed things that required acknowledgement before action. The memory pensieve contained the castle's entire recorded history. That was not a thing you walked up to without preparation. It deserved the same respect the charter had deserved, the respect of arriving ready, which meant arriving with the right questions rather than with curiosity alone. By February, they had the questions. Hermione had identified the access protocol in the charter's 14th section, both regents, simultaneous contact with the surface, a focused intention directed at a specific subject or period. The experience, the charter noted in precise Old English, was navigable. You could move through it together. She told Harry this on a Wednesday evening in the vault. He listened, and when she finished he said, "Tom Riddle." "Tom Riddle," she agreed. The surface of the pensieve was cold against their fingertips, and then, very quickly, was not there. The vault around them dissolved, not dramatically, not with the falling sensation of a conventional pensieve drop, but incrementally, the way a room goes dark when a candle is turned down rather than blown out. The four-color light faded. What replaced it was depth, a quality of being inside something very large, something that extended in all directions without visible boundary. Then, the first memory found them. Tom Riddle was 11 years old, and he was in the library. Not the restricted section, the ordinary library, the ancient history section. He was standing before a specific book, with the focused attention of someone who has already decided what they're looking for, and is confirming rather than discovering. His magical signature, visible in the pensieve's rendering as a faint outline around his form, was sharp and cold and distinctly itself, the way certain notes on a piano are themselves, and not quite like any adjacent note. The castle had watched him. Harry could feel this in the quality of the memory. The castle had known, from the first day, that this boy required attention. They moved to the next memory without deciding to. Tom Riddle in a second-floor bathroom, standing before a tap that bore a small engraved serpent, speaking in a language that left no sound in the air. The castle's rendering of Parseltongue was visual rather than auditory, a silvery thread unspooling from his mouth, winding into the tap's mechanism, something old in the plumbing responding to it. Tom Riddle in an abandoned sixth-floor classroom, alone, performing something that the pensieve could not fully render. The image around the act had a quality of resistance. The castle had recorded it, and whatever had been done had partially fought the recording, leaving the edges of the memory burned. What remained? A desk. Tom Riddle's face at 16, set with an expression of absolute private triumph, and the air around him afterward, carrying a darkness that the castle had registered in its architecture, the way a building registers a crack in its foundation. Small, fundamental, he's done something, Harry said. Keep watching, Hermione said. The burned memory came last. The pensieve's rendering of it was partial and effortful, images assembling and dissolving before they could fully cohere. What remained after the burning? A diary. Black cover, unremarkable, Tom Riddle holding it with both hands. An expression on his face that was not triumph but something more interior, the expression of someone performing surgery on themselves, present for the pain and committed to the outcome regardless. And then, for 3 seconds, clear, a piece of something leaving him. In the Pensieve's rendering it was visible in his magical outline, a section of it, small and ragged at the edges, separating from the whole, being folded, being put somewhere. The image burned away. Harry pulled back from the Pensieve's surface without removing his hand. He split his soul, he said. He put part of it in the diary. More than once, Hermione said. Her voice had the quality it carried when she was working through the last steps of a calculation and could see the answer before she finished arriving at it. Controlled, but only just. The 6th floor classroom, that was another one. He intended to do this multiple times. 7, Harry said. She looked at him. He wanted 7. He was not looking at the Pensieve. He was looking at a point somewhere between the Pensieve and the middle distance. I know because. He stopped. He looked at her. He raised one hand and touched the scar on his forehead, lightly, with 2 fingers. Because he told me. Not directly. But something he left here, it knows. It remembers what he intended. The vault was very quiet around them. Hermione looked at him for a long moment, not with alarm, with the careful, precise attention she gave to information that required correct handling. Harry, she said, the scar isn't just a scar. It was not a question. He shook his head. Then we'll need to deal with that, she said. But not today. Today we need to understand what else he made. He nodded. The expression on his face was not fear. It was the expression of someone who has received a diagnosis and is now organizing their response to it, present to the weight of it, not crushed by it. He moved his hand away from his forehead. Show me Ravenclaw, Hermione said to the Pensieve, not to Harry, but to the surface itself, which had been responding to directed intention since they began. The memory was over 1,000 years old. Harry had expected degradation, distance, the quality of very old photographs. It did not come. The Pensieve rendered Rowena Ravenclaw in the vault itself, this room, these walls, this basin, with a clarity that made the Tom Riddle memories feel like drafts by comparison, as if the castle had recorded this one with particular care, as if it had known it would matter. Rowena Ravenclaw was tall, with dark hair and gray eyes and the posture of someone who had never needed to prove their intelligence to a room and had consequently stopped thinking about rooms altogether. She was standing at the central table with the charter open before her, writing, not composing, but transcribing something already formed, putting it down with the speed of someone recording before the precision of a thought could soften. She finished a passage. She set down the quill. She looked up. Harry felt Hermione go still beside him. Rowena Ravenclaw was looking directly at Hermione, not at the space where a future viewer might stand, not at the room in general, at Hermione with the specific focus of someone who can see the person they are looking at, who knows the face, who has been waiting to see it for a very long time. Memory figures did not do this. They were echoes, recordings, light in old water. They moved through their moments without awareness of observation. Rowena Ravenclaw smiled. It was not the smile of a figure in a recording. It was the smile of someone who had placed something in a specific location 1,000 years ago and was now watching the right person find it. She reached to the table beside her and lifted a book. She held it toward Hermione, both hands, the way you offer something you have kept carefully, and tilted it so the cover was visible. The cover bore a single name. Dagworth. The memory ended. The vault returned around them. Harry's hand was still at the Pensieve's surface. He removed it. Beside him, Hermione had not moved. She was looking at the space where Rowena Ravenclaw had been standing. She knew, Hermione said. She knew you'd come, Harry said. She put that memory there for you. She planned for you. She said nothing for a long time. Harry waited. He had learned that her silences were not empty, but this one had a different quality than the working silences. It was not rapid internal movement. It was stillness of a kind he had not seen from her before. "She knew my face," Hermione said finally. Her voice was careful in the way of someone carrying something fragile. "1,000 years ago she knew my face." "Yes," Harry said. She picked up the book Rowena had held toward her in the memory. The cover bore a name she had seen before, not in the vault, not in the charter. In her mother's handwriting, on the inside cover of a photograph album that had always seemed too old to have been bought new. Dagworth, a family name her mother had mentioned once as a maiden name from several generations back, then never again. She stopped. She pressed her hand flat on the table. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it tonight," Harry said. She nodded. She did not pick up her quill for another 4 minutes, which was, for Hermione, a very long time. She looked at him then, a brief, sideways look that carried something she did not have a word for yet, and did not try to name. Then she looked at the pensieve, and at the charter on the table, and at the room that Rowena Ravenclaw had built and sat in and written in and left a message in, across 1,000 years of stone and silence, addressed to a girl from London who had not known, until this moment, that she had always been expected. "We should write down everything we saw about the Horcruxes tonight," she said. "While the detail is precise." "I'll get the ink," Harry said. He crossed to the table. She sat down. Outside the vault, the castle breathed its slow, 4-second pulse, steady and unhurried, the rhythm of something that has been waiting a very long time and has learned, over centuries, that the right people always arrive eventually. They always do. The potions classroom had a different quality when it was empty. During lessons, it was all low heat and controlled vapor, and the specific attention of 30 students trying not to make mistakes in front of someone who noticed mistakes the way other people noticed weather, constantly, without effort, and with an opinion about it. After hours, the room became something else. Older, the stones in the dungeon ran deeper than the castle's upper architecture, and in the quiet they expressed this, a heaviness, a patience, a room that had been waiting for centuries. Harry stood in front of Snape's desk and let the room be what it was. Snape sat behind it with his fingers steepled and looked at Harry with an expression that had several layers and was not going to volunteer any of them. He had asked Harry to stay after the lesson. He had not said why. Harry had known this conversation was coming for 2 weeks and had decided to let it arrive on its own terms. "I am told," Snape said, "that the Board of Governors has experienced a structural change." "Yes," Harry said. "I am told that Quirrell's removal from the school was not the result of a nervous breakdown." "No," Harry said. "I am told that you and Miss Granger have been in possession of the founding charter for 5 months, and that Albus is still in the process of adjusting to this information." "That's accurate," Harry said. He stood with his hands at his sides, present, grounded, not performing anything. "Professor, you have something we need." Snape looked at him. "You are the finest potions master alive," Harry said. He said it the way he might say the dungeon is underground, as a property of the thing, not a compliment to be given or received. "You have access to knowledge about dark magic and its reversal that doesn't exist in any library we've found. And you," he paused. The pause was not for effect. "You were her friend. My mother. You were her friend before almost anyone else was." The room was very quiet. The jars on the walls held their stillness. The banked fires gave their low orange light. Snape's expression did not change in any way that Harry could have described specifically, but the quality of the room shifted the way the quality of water shifts when something moves through it, not visible at the surface, registered in the depth. "You know what the Horcruxes are," Harry continued, "not because anyone told you. Because you are one of the few people in the world capable of working it out from available evidence, and you have been watching Voldemort's movements for years, through a channel most people don't know exists." Snape said nothing. His jaw held the precise tension of someone who has disciplined themselves against reaction for so long that the discipline has become structural. "We're not asking for your loyalty," Harry said. "We're offering a partnership. Hermione and I manage the governance architecture. What we need is a high alchemist, someone with deep knowledge of potion alchemy, curse reversal, and dark artifact neutralization. Someone who won't require an explanation when we hand them a Horcrux and ask for help destroying it without killing anyone in the process." He let that settle. "You'd be working with us, not for us. Your contributions would be treated as equal to ours in the vault." Snape was silent for long enough that the fire shifted in its grate, and the sound of it was the only sound in the room. "Where," he said, with the careful precision of someone isolating a variable, "did you encounter the term High Alchemist?" "The Charter lists the role," Harry said. "There was one in the Founder's time. They worked alongside the First Regents as a peer, not a subordinate. The position has been vacant since 1203. Another silence, longer than the first. "I have conditions," Snape said. "Of course you do," Harry said. "What are they?" Hermione was in the vault when Harry came back. She was at the table with 3 sources open and a 4th propped against the Pensieve's basin, which she used as a bookstand when the table was at capacity, working through something with the focused velocity she reached in the late evening when the day's obligations were finished, and she had the particular quality of time that had no edges. She did not look up when Harry descended the spiral staircase, but she registered his arrival the way she registered most things, without interrupting what she was doing, filing the information for the moment it became relevant. "Well," she said, when he reached the table. "He has conditions," Harry said. She set down her quill. "What are they?" Harry told her. Snape's conditions were 3. He would provide consultation, research, and practical alchemical support in the vault and only in the vault, through channels that left no visible record in the school's official operations. He would retain his position as potions professor without modification. And he would be addressed in any context related to the Regency work as colleague, not professor, not advisor, not consultant. The word was accurate. He required accuracy. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Colleague," she said. "That's right. I thought you'd think so," Harry said. "It's constitutionally correct, actually. The Charter uses that specific term for the High Alchemist's relationship to the Regents. He either read it somewhere or arrived at the same word independently, which is..." She stopped herself. She picked up her quill. "When does he start?" "He said he'd think about it," Harry said. "He'll be here within 2 days," Hermione said. "He's already decided. The thinking about it is for his own accounting." She was right. Snape appeared at the entrance to the vault 2 days later, without announcement, without calling ahead. He had a file of notes under his arm. He did not explain the file. He set it on the table. "The soul tether architecture in a Horcrux," he said, without preamble, requires a 3-stage neutralization process to destroy the artifact without releasing the contained soul fragment in a form that can cause collateral damage. The standard methods used in historical records, basilisk venom, fiendfire, address the artifact but not the release. There is a containment procedure. He opened the file. "I have been developing it since the year after Voldemort's fall." Hermione looked at the first page of notes. Her expression moved through 3 stages in rapid succession: assessment, recognition, and then the attention she reserved for things that were better than she had expected them to be. "You've been working on this alone," she said. "For years." "Voldemort's return was not a theoretical possibility," Snape said. "It was a scheduling problem." Harry looked at the notes. The notation was dense and precise, the handwriting the particular script of someone who writes quickly because they think quickly, and has never bothered to slow down for legibility because the documents are for themselves. The margins contained secondary observations in an even smaller hand, refinements, alternatives, questions the main text had generated and not yet answered. "Without telling Dumbledore the full extent of it," Harry said. Snape looked at him. Dumbledore would have managed it, Snape said. He would have incorporated it into his existing architecture. It would have become one more instrument in his office, calibrated to his timing. A pause. I preferred it to remain mine until it could be used correctly. Harry nodded. He understood this, not from personal experience with Dumbledore's management of people, not yet, but from a more fundamental understanding of what it meant to build something carefully and want to be the one who decided when it was ready. It stays yours, Harry said. We're using it together. That's different. Snape looked at him for a moment with the expression he used when he was reassessing a conclusion he had believed settled. Then he looked at Hermione's notes spread across the table beside his own file. He looked at the memory pensieve. He looked at the Wardstone Chamber's entrance at the far end of the vault. The Founder's memory pensieve, he said. His voice had the quality of someone identifying something they had believed to be a myth, not surprise, but the particular adjustment of a mind that keeps its myths in a specific category and is now being asked to move one of them. I had theorized it might exist. The references in pre-modern alchemical literature are oblique but consistent. Most things people think are myths turn out to be rooms under libraries, Hermione said. Snape looked at her. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that did not become anything but had briefly considered it. He pulled out a chair. He sat down. He opened his file to the second page and turned it so both of them could read it, and he began to explain the containment procedure with the focused, undecorated precision of someone who has been waiting for the right audience for years and is not going to waste the occasion on preamble. Harry listened. Hermione made notes in the margin of her own parchment, cross-referencing Snape's procedure against the Charters section on dark artifact neutralization, asking questions at the exact points where the two frameworks intersected and diverged. Snape answered the questions without condescension and without surprise, in the manner of someone who has decided that the person asking is worth answering fully. The dungeon fires held their low light. The three of them worked. Outside the vault, the castle registered the new configuration with its characteristic patience, a slight settling, a quality of rightness in the architecture. The same sensation as a door closing properly in its frame after a long time of sitting slightly ajar. Harry noted it. He turned a page. The work continued. The castle had been showing them the same thing for 3 weeks. Not insistently, the Wardstone's pulse did not spike. It simply kept returning, in the low register of the castle's ongoing awareness, to a specific location beneath the school. A presence in the deep architecture. Something very old, very large, and in a state the castle's record-keeping filed not under threat but under distress. Harry had described it to Hermione as the sensation of a note being played in the wrong key, not discordant enough to be immediately alarming, but sustained long enough to become a kind of pressure. She had cross-referenced it against the Charters section on indigenous castle creatures, and had the answer within a day. The first attempt had failed in November. Snape did not announce it. He arrived in the vault on a Thursday evening with a sealed box and set it on the table and opened it, and what was inside was the remains of a practice object. A small brass mirror they had used to test the containment procedure, chosen because its magical signature was simple enough to model the fragment's boundary conditions without the specific complexity of an actual Horcrux. The mirror was wrong. Not destroyed, wrong, in the way that objects are wrong when something has moved through them that the object was not built to hold. The surface had gone black. The frame had partially inverted, one corner folded inward at an angle that brass could not naturally achieve. The third stage of the containment, Snape said. The soul fragment's boundary conditions in a real Horcrux are not analogous to a simple magical signature. I modeled incorrectly. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, without apology, with the precision of someone for whom accuracy was the only relevant consideration. The fragment in a Horcrux carries a resonance of the host consciousness. The third stage disrupts the fragment's boundary without accounting for that resonance, which means the disruption is not clean. In a practice object, you get this. He indicated the inverted frame. In an actual Horcrux, the fragment releases incompletely. A partial release is worse than no release. Hermione was already at her notes. She had the third stage formulation open. The resonance variable, she said. You need a counter frequency. Yes, Snape said. Which requires knowing the specific character of Riddle's consciousness at the moment of each Horcrux creation. Yes, Snape said. Which is why I need the Pensieve's record of the 6th floor classroom. All of it, including the burned edges. Harry looked at the inverted mirror. He thought about the Horcrux they had been closest to retrieving, the locket, identified in the Pensieve sitting in a ministry evidence locker where it had been sitting since 1979 when someone had found it in a house clearance and logged it without knowing what it was. He had been thinking about the locket as a problem nearly solved. He looked at the brass frame folded inward at its impossible angle and revised this. How long? Harry said. Snape considered. 6 weeks. Possibly 8. Then we start tonight, Hermione said, and opened the Pensieve. It took 9 weeks. The diary had already been handled. Hermione had tracked the Horcrux's location through the castle's truth site. The object surfacing on the living map as a point of wrong-colored light in Ginny Weasley's belongings. Visible to the regents because the ward stone rendered dark artifacts distinct from ordinary objects, the same way it rendered animagus forms distinct from animals. Snape had extracted it during a Tuesday Quidditch practice with a retrieval charm that left no trace and caused no alarm. The diary was in a sealed lead box in the vault before Ginny Weasley returned from the pitch. But the diary had been a direction, not a cause. The basilisk in the chamber had been placed there by Slytherin himself, woven into the castle's deepest architecture as a guardian, and she did not require the diary's instruction to exist. She required it to have a coherent purpose. Without it, she had been moving through the walls for weeks with the directionless urgency of something trying to fulfill a function it could no longer clearly remember. The petrifications had stopped when they removed the diary. The basilisk had stilled. But the distress had not. They brought Snape. He carried the potion of clarity in a sealed vial in his inner pocket. 3 months of development, 6 iterations, the final formulation derived from a framework he and Hermione had built together in the vault, cross-referencing his alchemical notes against the Charter's section on corrupted magical creatures, and a Founders-era text on Guardian Beast, rehabilitation that Hermione had found in the 14th alcove and spent 2 weeks translating from a dialect of Old English that had not been in common use since the 12th century. The delivery mechanism was Hermione's solution, a droplet mist form, inhalable rather than consumed, dispersible at a safe distance. She had tested the dispersal pattern in the vault using a scaled approximation and had not been satisfied until the 3rd model. Snape had made one small adjustment to the vial's release mechanism that improved the dispersal radius by 11%. She had noted the adjustment without comment. He had not pointed it out. They brought mirrors, small, handheld, the kind sold in Hogsmeade for 2 sickles. Hermione had purchased 9 of them and distributed them among the 3 with a brief explanation of the navigation system she had devised. Primary sight through the mirror. Peripheral orientation by the castle's sovereign thread, which Harry could relay as directional information to the other 2. Snape had listened to the explanation once and required no repetition. The entrance to the chamber was the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor. Moaning Myrtle was absent. The map showed her temporarily displaced elsewhere in the castle's plumbing, which suited them. Harry stood before the sink with the engraved serpent on the tap and spoke the opening command in parcel tongue. The silver thread of it unspooled into the tap's mechanism. The sink descended. The passage opened. They went down. Harry stopped twice on the descent. Not for tactical reasons. His hands were cold, and his breathing had gone shallow in a way he recognized from the cupboard under the stairs, the specific physical response of a body that has learned, over years, that certain kinds of dark require preparation before entering. He stood in the passage and breathed. Snape and Hermione waited without comment. Then he continued. The Chamber of Secrets was vast and very still. Harry had seen it through the pensieve, the long gallery of carved serpents, the shallow flood on the floor catching green-tinged light from sources he could not identify. The massive stone face of Salazar Slytherin at the far end, rendered in the scale of someone who intended to be remembered. The memory had not fully prepared him for the physical reality of it, which was less sinister than the pensieve's rendering and more simply old. The carvings were extraordinary. The serpents moved slightly in the current of air from the passage behind them. Stone that had been worked so finely, it retained the quality of something alive. The water on the floor was cold and clear. The face of Slytherin was not threatening. It was the face of someone who had built something and expected it to last. It had lasted. Harry moved his mirror to the right and found what he was looking for without needing to search. The basilisk was at the far end of the chamber, coiled at the base of Slytherin's statue in the specific posture of a very large creature that is trying to occupy as little space as possible. She was still. The coiling was not the stillness of rest, it was the stillness of something holding itself together through effort. The muscular tension of an animal that does not know what it is supposed to be doing and is waiting, with diminishing coherence, for instruction that has stopped coming. Harry felt her through two channels simultaneously, the Parseltongue connection, which gave him the specific texture of her distress as a kind of noise, overlapping frequencies that didn't resolve into a clear signal, and the Wardstone resonance, which told him what the castle felt about what was happening to its oldest guardian, which was the specific grief of a place watching something it was responsible for suffer in a way it could not directly remedy. "She's confused," he said. He was not speaking to Hermione or Snape. He was speaking to the chamber itself. In the mode that was not quite Parseltongue, and not quite the Wardstone's old magic, but the place where the two frequencies overlapped. The language of the castle's deepest architecture, which the basilisk had been hearing and responding to since Slytherin placed her here. She heard the difference. Her coiling loosened by 1 degree. Her head, which had been pressed low against the base of the statue, lifted slightly. The mirrors showed Harry her eye, ancient, amber, the size of a dinner plate, and in it something close to recognition. The awareness of a presence that spoke in a frequency she associated with authority that predated the false commands. Harry began to speak in Parseltongue. Not commanding, explaining. This was the specific challenge Hermione had identified in their preparation. The difference between the directive mode of Parseltongue, which Tom Riddle had used, and which the basilisk associated with the corrupted instructions, and the declarative mode, which was older, and which Harry had found by accident when he had spoken to the castle's map in Parseltongue to see what would happen, and the map had responded differently than it did to English. He told her what was real. He told her that Slytherin had placed her here to protect the school, not to attack its students. That the instruction she had been following had been threaded into her by someone who had no legitimate authority in this building. A boy who had taken a title he had not earned and given orders through a channel he had forced open. That the channel was now closed. That the regents were here, the actual owners of this castle, and they were asking her to lay down the false commands, because the false commands were not her purpose. They were a corruption of it. Beside him, Hermione spoke to the chamber's architecture and the Wardstone's old magic, not translating what Harry was saying, but running a parallel thread, addressing the building's memory of the basilisk's original installation. The charter's record of Slytherin's intent when he wove the guardian enchantment into the chamber's foundations. She was speaking to the castle about its own creature, in the castle's own language, reminding it of what it had been asked to hold. The two threads, Harry's Parseltongue and Hermione's old magic, were not the same frequency. They were complementary. The basilisk heard Harry. The chamber heard Hermione. What happened between those two hearings was the specific resonance of the same truth being spoken from two different directions and arriving at the same point simultaneously. Snape moved. He extended the vial. The release mechanism dispersed the potion of clarity in a fine mist at a radius of 4 meters. The mist caught the chamber's faint light for a moment, and then was invisible. The basilisk inhaled. Harry kept speaking in the declarative parcel tongue, steady and unhurried, because the potion needed the speech to work against. It did not simply remove the false commands. It disrupted the magical structure that held them in place. And the disruption required a correct signal to reorganize around. The potion was the solvent. Harry's words were the architecture the basilisk's instincts were being asked to return to. At 30 seconds, something changed. It moved through her from tail to crown, a release, visible even in the small mirrors, a slow wave of muscular unbinding as the false command's hold on her nervous system loosened and then let go. Her coils spread outward, not in aggression but in the specific expansion of a creature that has been holding itself contracted and is now allowed to take up the space it actually occupies. Her eyes, which had been amber clouded with the specific opacity of a corrupted magical creature, cleared. She looked at Harry through the mirror system. Not at the mirror. At Harry. "Guardian," Harry said in parcel tongue. "Welcome back." The basilisk lowered her head to the floor of the chamber, fully, slowly, the movement of something enormous making a deliberate gesture of acknowledgement. She settled. The tension that had been in the chamber's air for weeks, the distress note in the low register of the castle's pulse, resolved. The Wardstone's sovereign thread carried it to Harry immediately, a shift in the castle's fundamental pulse, a quality of relief in the architecture that was not metaphor. The chamber had been holding something wrong for a long time. It was not holding it anymore. Hermione made a brief note in the small parchment she carried in her left pocket. The dispersal radius was correct, she said, quietly, to Snape. The formulation was correct, Snape said, which was not agreement but was, from Snape, its functional equivalent. Harry looked at the basilisk, enormous, calm, her coils arranged around the base of Slytherin's statue, with the patient authority of something that knows its purpose and is at rest in it. Slytherin had built this chamber and placed this guardian in it, and the guardian had been here for 1,000 years, waiting for someone to speak to her correctly. He stood in the cold water on the chamber floor and thought that this was what the charter meant by tending, not defeating, not acquiring, returning things to what they were before damage was done to them. "We should go," Hermione said. "We have Transfiguration at 8. They went. The 5th dot had been there since October. Harry had noticed it first, a ghost of a light on the living map, inconsistent, smaller than the other dots in the first-year boys' dormitory, blurring at its edges as if the castle's record-keeping could not quite commit to a classification. It appeared most nights. Some nights it migrated through the walls in a way that student dots did not. It was clearly there. It was clearly not a student. He had brought Hermione to the map on a Wednesday evening and pointed at it without comment. She had looked at it for 40 seconds. Then she had gone to the charter's appendix on Truth Site, which she had tabbed because she flagged anything related to the castle's observational capacities as potentially relevant, and she had read the relevant passage with the focused speed of someone confirming a suspicion rather than building one from nothing. Truth Site, the castle's living map, renders all entities within the grounds according to their true nature, without regard for glamours. Polyjuice transformation, or animagus concealment. Entities in concealed form appear as separate registrations from the form being concealed. She had set the charter down. She had looked at the map. She had looked at the small, blurred dot occupying the same space as Ron Weasley's rat. "That rat," Harry said. "That rat," Hermione confirmed. They had spent weeks building the case. Not because they needed more evidence. The map was unambiguous, and the charter's Truth Site provision meant that what the map showed carried the same weight as direct observation, but because Hermione had identified that the legal architecture of what came next required the evidence to be organized in a specific sequence. The innocents first. then the witness, then the mechanism of release. In that order. Anything else created procedural vulnerabilities. The innocence was documented in the pensieve. The castle's memory of Sirius Black's arrest contained something no proceeding had ever examined, because no proceeding had ever occurred. The magical signature at the scene in Godric's Hollow, the specific forensic record of what spell had been cast and by whose wand. The castle's memory extended there because Lily Potter's sacrifice had sent a wave of ancient magic outward from the house that night, and ancient magic left records in stone, and the records had been waiting for 11 years for someone with access to the right pensieve to find them. Hermione had found them. She had spent a week translating the magical forensics into legal language. Snape had reviewed the translation for accuracy. His knowledge of dark magic forensics was, as with most things, more comprehensive than anyone who hadn't specifically asked him would have suspected. The letter to Sirius Black went through the castle's official post. Harry had written it himself. A letter from the regents carried the charter seal. But a letter from Harry carried something the charter seal could not. The specific weight of James Potter's son, which was information Sirius Black had not had access to in 12 years, and which deserved to arrive in Harry's handwriting rather than formal regent script. He had written 3 drafts. The first was too long. The second was too careful. The third was 8 lines. We know you're innocent. We know his name. He's been in the castle since September as a rat. We have the evidence, pensieve records, forensic magical documentation, and a living witness on the castle's map who cannot leave the grounds in his true form. We'll handle it. You don't need to do anything except wait a little longer. H.P. He folded it, sealed it with the charter seal, and gave it to the wardstone to send. The ward went into the wardstone on a Thursday. Harry and Hermione had drafted it together over 2 evenings. The language required precision, broad enough to cover all animagus forms without being so broad that it affected the castle's other creature populations. No being within the grounds of Hogwarts shall maintain an animagus transformation for longer than 60 seconds from the moment this ward is active. They spoke it at the wardstone simultaneously. The aurora rose. The castle accepted it. In the first-year boys' dormitory, in the middle of a Thursday afternoon while the dormitory was empty of students, Scabbers the rat became Peter Pettigrew. He was in a cage. The cage was 12 inches by 8. Peter Pettigrew was not. Ron Weasley, returning from Herbology 40 minutes later, opened the dormitory door. What happened next involved a sound that McGonagall later described, in her formal incident report, as a significant disturbance of the peace. Harry and Hermione, receiving the wardstone's pulse of the event from the vault below, heard it as a confirmation. The castle escorted Peter Pettigrew to a room on the 2nd floor that had been, until that morning, a disused storage space, and that was now, by wardstone declaration, a regent holding chamber, 4 walls, a door that opened only from the outside, and a ward against animagus transformation that was redundant given the castle-wide ward, but that Hermione had added on the principle that redundancy. Insecurity systems was not inefficiency. He was there when Harry and Hermione arrived. He looked exactly as the pensieve had shown him, small, pale, with the person who has spent 12 years performing helplessness and has lost track of where the performance ends. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone encountering something they had hoped very much not to encounter. Harry looked at him for a long moment. He did not feel what he had expected to feel, which had been something large and consuming. He felt something quieter and more useful, the satisfaction of a problem correctly solved, and beneath it, at a depth he did not examine in Peter Pettigrew's presence, the specific grief of understanding what this man's choices had cost. "Hello, Peter," he said. Peter Pettigrew said nothing. "We're going to need a Veritaserum testimony," Hermione said, from Harry's left. She was writing in her parchment. "Snape has it prepared." Then the Wizengamot submission, the pensieve evidence in certified form, and the forensic documentation from the Godric's Hollow records. She turned a page. I'd estimate 6 weeks for a full proceeding, given that we're submitting under ancient right provision, which requires expedited review. Peter Pettigrew looked at her. Then at Harry. Then at the door. The ward on this room is attached to the ward stone, Harry said. The castle knows you're here. There's nowhere to go. He was not unkind when he said it. It was simply true, and the truth did not require a particular tone. The Wizengamot proceeding took 5 weeks. Harry and Hermione appeared before it, not as students but as the sitting regents of Hogwarts. The presiding examiner, a senior Wizengamot witch named Griselda Marchbanks, who led the body's examinations committee and who had spent 60 years developing an absolute immunity to being impressed by age, looked at them across the chamber for a long moment at the start of the first session. Then she called the proceeding to order and treated their submissions with the same procedural rigor she would have applied to any ancient rite filing, which was exactly what Hermione had predicted and what they needed. The Veritaserum testimony was dispositive. The pensieve evidence was corroborating. The Godric's hollow forensic records were, in Marchbanks' own words, the most comprehensive piece of retrospective magical evidence the body had examined in 40 years. Peter Pettigrew was convicted. Sirius Black's conviction was vacated. The ministry issued a formal statement of wrongful imprisonment. The statement did not contain an apology. Hermione noted this for future reference. Sirius Black walked through the Hogwarts gates on a Tuesday. Harry was in the courtyard when he arrived. He had been there for 20 minutes, standing in the cold with his hands in his pockets and the castle's pulse steady beneath his feet. Sirius was thin. He was gray at the temples in a way that Azkaban rather than age had put there, and he moved with the careful deliberateness of someone relearning that the space around them is not going to contract. He was wearing robes that Hermione had arranged to be sent ahead, clean, the right size, ordinary, and he was carrying nothing, because there had been nothing to carry out. He stopped when he saw Harry. He looked at him for a long time. The courtyard was quiet. The castle held its breath in the specific way it held its breath around moments it recognized as significant. "You're very short," Sirius said. "You look terrible," Harry said. "I've had 12 years in Azkaban," he said. "I know," Harry said. "Do you want to see the vault? We have biscuits." Something moved across Sirius Black's face, a sequence of things arriving faster than could be tracked, that resolved into an expression that had not been there at the start of it. Not happiness exactly, not yet. Something that was the precondition for happiness, the recognition that the ground beneath you is solid and is going to remain solid, and that you are allowed now to put your weight on it. He looked up at the castle. The towers caught the December light and held it in the old stone the way the old stone always held light, patiently, without display. "Yeah," he said. "All right." They walked inside together. The castle's pulse registered the new presence in the grounds, a point of light on the living map, moving through the entrance hall, accompanying the 2 regent lights that burned steady at the castle's center. The map had a new dot. It was bright, and it was staying. The Sovereign Declaration was 5 years in the making and 4 minutes to speak. Snape stood to Harry's left. Sirius stood to Hermione's right. Dumbledore was at the back of the Wardstone chamber, present, observant, and at a distance that Harry had initially interpreted as discomfort, and had since recategorized as the specific posture of someone learning to occupy a different role than the one they were used to. The Declaration took 4 minutes to speak in full. Hermione had written it over 3 weeks, drafting against the Charter's constitutional language and cross-referencing every clause against the Confederation protocols to ensure nothing in it could be challenged on procedural grounds. She had given it to Snape to review for vulnerabilities. He had found 2. She had addressed both. They spoke it together, the aurora rising around their joined hands at the Wardstone, slow, layered, the 4 colors in their familiar order. The Wardstone recorded it in the Charter memories. The filing at the Wizengamot went out through the castle's official post the same evening. Afterward, Sirius said, They'll fight it. Let them, Hermione said. She was already at the table, reviewing the next section of documents. We have the older document. Sirius looked at Harry. Harry looked at the ward stone, still faintly auroral in the aftermath of the declaration. She's right, Harry said. She usually is, Sirius said, with the tone of someone who has been in the vault for 3 months and has updated his priors accordingly. The parchment floated out of the gates on a Wednesday morning. It moved at the specific, unhurried pace of something that had been asked to do a job and was doing it without opinion about the recipient. The gates had not opened. They had parted by precisely the width required to allow the parchment to pass through, and no further. And when the parchment cleared them, they closed again with the soft finality of something that has made a decision. Cornelius Fudge stood on the road outside and watched it come toward him. He was accompanied by 2 Aurors and a ministry legal clerk named Haddington, who had been with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement for 19 years and who had developed, in that time, a comprehensive immunity to surprise. Haddington's immunity did not extend to gates that opened slightly to issue documents and then closed again. He watched the parchment arrive at Fudge's hand with the expression of someone updating a very long list. Fudge read it. He read it twice. His color changed, once going up and once going down. The parchment read, "This is official notice that the grounds of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry constitute a sovereign institution under the founding charter of 990 AD. Ministry jurisdiction over the internal governance, finances, and administration of this institution is hereby formally contested under Ancient Rite Provision 7, Section 12. Any ministry official entering the grounds does so as a guest subject to the institution's laws and the authority of the sitting regents. This notice has been filed with the Wizengamot under the above provision and is effective immediately. The Regents of Hogwarts, per the Charter of the Architects." Fudge looked at the gates. The gates did not look back, because gates do not have faces, but the effect was similar. "Open these gates," he said, to no one in particular. The gates did not open. Haddington read the parchment over Fudge's shoulder. He took out his own parchment and made a note. "The Charter of 990 AD. I'll need to verify the filing." He paused. "If the filing is valid, Minister, we may need to reconsider the scope of this visit." "The scope of this visit," Fudge said, "is a routine financial inspection." "Yes," Haddington said carefully. "Though, if the ancient rite provision is properly invoked, routine financial inspections of sovereign institutions require the institution's consent under the 1347 Confederation Protocols." Another pause. "I'll look into it." He looked into it. It took 4 days. He presented his findings to Fudge in a memo whose conclusion occupied 2 sentences at the end. "The Charter of 990 AD is a valid founding instrument under ancient rite doctrine. The sovereign declaration filed at the Wizengamot is procedurally correct." Fudge read the memo. His color did the same thing it had done outside the gates. The ministry did not attempt to enter Hogwarts without notification again. The gates remained operable. The distinction between guest and authority remained clear. Dumbledore requested a private meeting in December, not in his office. He came to the vault. He had been given access in October, a formal regent invitation that Harry had written himself, because the charter required regent authorization for non-regent adults to descend the spiral staircase, and because inviting Dumbledore in was better than the alternative, which was Dumbledore spending the rest of the year finding creative ways to be present near the library entrance at unusual hours. He sat across the table from Harry and Hermione. Snape was not present. This was deliberate, agreed between the 3 of them in advance, because Snape's presence at a meeting with Dumbledore required its own management, and this meeting was not about that. Dumbledore told them what he knew. He told them about Voldemort, the confirmed survival, the specific evidence he had accumulated, the timeline of expected return. He told them about the Horcruxes. He watched their faces when he said the word and registered, with the precise observation of a man who had been reading rooms for over a century, that neither of them reacted with surprise. "You already know," he said. "We identified 6 of the 7 in our second month," Hermione said. The Pensieve's record of Tom Riddle's time at Hogwarts contains forensic evidence of at least 2 creation events within the castle. We cross-referenced the artifacts against the castle's memory of his movements after leaving school and built the full list from there. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "And the 7th?" He said it carefully, in the way of someone asking a question they already suspect the answer to and want to be wrong about. Harry touched his forehead. 2 fingers, briefly. "Yes," Dumbledore said, after a silence. "I was afraid of that." He looked at Harry with the expression that people who wrote about Dumbledore afterward always struggled to describe accurately. Not pity, not calculation, but a quality of genuine sorrow directed at something that could not be changed. "I had intended. We have a plan," Hermione said. Dumbledore looked at her. "For the extraction," she said. "Colleague Snape has been developing the alchemical framework for years. The procedure doesn't require Harry to die." She said it without emphasis, a factual correction to an assumption she had identified in the pause before Dumbledore's unfinished sentence. "It requires Voldemort to attempt the killing curse, which triggers the soul fragment's attempt to rejoin its parent consciousness, which creates a specific window in which the fragment can be cleanly separated, without damage to the host. The window is approximately 4 seconds. The preparation required to use those 4 seconds correctly is considerable." Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment, then at Harry, then at his hands folded on the table. "I should very much like to hear the full plan," he said. "We know," Harry said. "That's why we invited you." They told him. At the end, Dumbledore was quiet. "The gap," Dumbledore said. He set down his tea. "The south perimeter gap you intend to leave open. I cannot support that." "We know," Hermione said. "You are proposing to allow one of the most dangerous dark wizards in recorded history to enter these grounds deliberately, with students present, on the calculation that your preparations are sufficient." His voice was even, but the evenness was held rather than natural. "That is not a risk I am willing to accept." "It's not yours to accept or refuse," Harry said. He said it without hardness. "We understand your position. We're telling you our decision." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "I have made decisions about this school," Dumbledore said, "for 50 years. Decisions that were mine to make and decisions that were not. And I have not always distinguished clearly between them." A pause. "I am telling you that this one frightens me." "We're doing it anyway," Harry said, "because the alternative is waiting for him to find a vector we haven't identified and controlled, and we will not fight this on his timing." Dumbledore set down his tea. He was quiet for a moment in the specific way he was quiet when he was organizing rather than processing. The difference was visible to Harry now, in a way it had not been in year 1. "There is another option," Dumbledore said. "One I have been developing for some time. It requires Harry to be present at the moment of Voldemort's return, in a controlled location with a full order presence." "We know about that plan," Hermione said. Dumbledore looked at her. "The castle has architectural memory of every significant conversation held within its walls," she said, not unkindly. "We identified your contingency planning in February. The controlled graveyard scenario requires Voldemort to act on his own timeline through a vector you select. It assumes he won't identify the setup." She paused. "He will. He has sufficient legitimacy to read Wormtail's surface thoughts, and Wormtail will know about the Order presence within an hour of their assembly. Your plan survives only if Voldemort acts faster than he thinks." Dumbledore was still. "He won't," Harry said. "He's spent 50 years not acting faster than he thinks." A long silence. "You have read the castle's memory of my private conversations," Dumbledore said. His voice was precise and even. "Yes," Harry said. Because the castle is ours to read, and you were planning something inside it that we needed to understand. We are not apologizing for that." Another silence. Longer. "Your plan," Dumbledore said finally, "requires two 15-year-olds to stand in an open courtyard and receive a killing curse without cover, without backup, with no contingency if the extraction does not function within the required window." "Yes," Harry said. "And you have tested this procedure how many times?" "We cannot test it," Hermione said. "The conditions are unreplicable outside the actual event. We have tested every component. The full sequence has not and cannot be rehearsed." Dumbledore looked at his hands. He looked at the documentation on the table. He read it, not glanced. Read. The specific attention of someone doing genuine work with a document, rather than looking for the point at which he could reasonably object. He turned 3 pages. He stopped at page 9. "The ward architecture on page 9, he said. "The castle's old magic holding the extraction framework during the 4-second window. If Voldemort disrupts the old magic, if he has prepared for it, then the window closes," Hermione said. "And Harry is still alive, and we have fought Voldemort inside Hogwarts at full sovereign activation with the Basilisk as a secondary defensive resource, and Snape managing the Death Eater's perimeter access. We do not win cleanly in that scenario. We likely still win." "Likely," Dumbledore said. "Likely," she confirmed. He closed the documentation. He looked at the Wardstone chamber entrance. He looked at the pensieve. He was doing something internal that Harry recognized because he did a version of it himself, the specific adjustment of someone who has held a weight alone for a long time and is being offered help with it, and is trying to determine whether the offer is real. "I would like," Dumbledore said finally, "to be present in the Wardstone chamber during the event. Not to interfere. To be available if the likely becomes unlikely." Harry looked at Hermione. She gave the small nod that meant she had already considered this, and it was acceptable. "You can be there," Harry said. The silence lasted long enough for the fire to shift in the grate. The castle knew about Crouch Jr. On the first day of term, Harry felt it in the Wardstone's pulse the moment the man walked through the gates in Moody's form, the same wrongness as the diary's light on the living map. The map showed 2 registrations occupying the same physical space, one labeled Moody, Alastor in the castle's record of staff, and beneath it, partially occluded, but present, a second registration that the castle's constitutional memory identified without ambiguity. Hermione had the relevant charter section open before Harry finished describing it. "Any individual entering the grounds under false identity, magical disguise, or polyjuice transformation shall be rendered visible to the sitting regents in their true form through the living map's truth sight provision, without exception." They watched Bartemius Crouch Jr. move through the castle for 4 weeks. This was Hermione's decision, and Harry had agreed with her reasoning. They needed the full shape of the plan before they removed the piece they had identified. A plan with a visible piece removed alerts the people who built it. A plan allowed to develop until its design is legible can be dismantled at the point of maximum disruption to the designers. By the end of October, they had everything. The portkey in the Triwizard Cup, the graveyard, the resurrection ritual. The specific sequence of events Crouch Jr. had been engineering since September, reconstructed from the castle's observation of his movements and conversations within the grounds. Harry wrote a memo to Dumbledore, 4 words and a diagram. Moody is not Moody. The diagram showed the dual registration on the living map, with the Polyjuice timeline annotated in Hermione's handwriting. Dumbledore came to the vault that night. He looked at the map for a long time. He asked 2 questions. He left with the expression of a man reorganizing a very large internal structure around a new central fact. Bartemius Crouch Jr. was handed to the DMLA with a sovereign decree and a Veritaserum testimony extracted under the castle's authority. The Portkey graveyard plan dissolved with him. Voldemort's return via that specific mechanism was not possible this year. The Triwizard Tournament continued. Harry's name had come out of the goblet regardless. The goblet's flame had burned gold for 11 seconds before producing the fourth slip. Not its ordinary red-orange, but the gold of the Wardstone's aurora at full activation. And when it produced the slip, the parchment was larger than a standard name slip, and the ink was something darker and more permanent. Dumbledore read it. His hands were steady. Harry stood before Dumbledore could speak. "We're filing a joint entry. Hermione and I constitute a single institutional entity under the Charter's co-regency provisions. The goblet accepted 2 names as one submission. We have the filing documentation." Hermione placed it on the nearest table. 11 pages. She had prepared it in August, when they had identified the tournament as a likely vector, and decided that controlling their participation was better than avoiding it. The joint entry stood. The first task was dragons. Harry and Hermione were partnered on the Hungarian Horntail, statistically the most dangerous breed in the tournament's historical record, which Hermione noted without apparent concern, because her concern was reserved for problems that were not already solved. Harry spoke to the Horntail before the task began, not in the arena, in the enclosure, through the barrier, in the mode between Parseltongue and Old Magic, telling her what was true. This was a performance. No harm was intended. The egg was not in danger. The Horntail looked at him, with amber eyes carrying their own quality of assessment. She listened. In the arena, she allowed them to approach. She watched them retrieve the egg with the posture of something that has been asked to participate in something it finds slightly beneath its dignity but is willing to accommodate. The expected drama, fire, chase, narrow escapes, did not materialize. The crowd did not know what to do with this. The judges' scores were high, and the judges looked uncertain about why. The second task was the lake. Hermione had been learning Mermish since first year, from the Charter's foundational grammar and 2 supplementary texts. She and Harry descended together, Harry adjusting the water temperature around them by 3 degrees. Enough to make the work sustainable, not enough to be observable from above. They swam into the merfolk village with the unhurried pace of people who have an appointment rather than an intrusion. She had sent formal regent communication to the village elder in November through the deep channel correspondence mechanism the Charter described. A specific stone in the lake's bed that the founders had installed as a mailbox and that no headmaster in recent memory had known existed. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. The 4 hostages were released on the elder's instruction following a formal exchange conducted entirely in Mermish. They surfaced with all 4. Bagman's commentary contained the phrase "most unusual second task in tournament history" twice before he gave up and described the weather instead. The third task was the maze. Harry and Hermione entered together, which the joint entry provision permitted. The maze's creatures responded to the Wardstone resonance the way magical creatures within the grounds consistently responded, with the quality of attention that recognized sovereign presence, which in practice meant that obstacles rearranged themselves around confrontation rather than toward it. The Sphinx asked its riddle. Hermione went still for 3 seconds, the specific stillness of someone checking work she already knows is correct. Then she answered. The Sphinx stepped aside. Harry felt the cup before they reached it. The same wrong-colored quality as the diary on the living map, a point of dark magic sitting on the cup's surface like an oil slick over water. He stopped 4 meters from it and put his hand out to stop Hermione. She had already stopped. She had felt it, too, through the Wardstone's resonance. He reached through the Wardstone's architectural reach, which extended to every object within the grounds, and found the enchantment's foundational thread. He did not cast a counterspell. Counterspells addressed surfaces. He pulled the thread. The Portkey enchantment unraveled from the inside, leaving the cup what it had always physically been, an old trophy with no magical properties beyond the ordinary enchantments of the tournament itself. Hermione picked it up. They walked out of the maze together into the floodlit arena. The crowd's silence lasted 7 seconds, the specific silence of 600 people simultaneously encountering something that did not fit their expectations and requiring a moment to find the correct response. Dumbledore was at the judges' enclosure. He looked at them, and at the cup in Hermione's hand, and at the maze behind them, and his expression was the one he wore when reality had confirmed something he had been hoping was possible. Hermione set the cup on the judge's table. She took out her notebook. She made a brief entry. Harry looked at the maze, at the arena, at the crowd. He thought, year 4. He thought, one more. The castle's pulse was steady beneath his feet, patient and certain and entirely unimpressed by the occasion, because the castle had been waiting for 1,000 years and knew, with the certainty of very old stone, that the work was nearly done. On the Monday before, Harry sat on the roof of the astronomy tower for an hour. He did not bring the charter. He did not bring the map. He sat on the stone with his legs over the edge and looked at the grounds, the lake, the forest, the Quidditch pitch, the lit windows of the greenhouses where Neville was probably working past hours, and he tried to find something like fear, and found instead something quieter and less useful, which was the awareness that tomorrow or the day after, something that had been true his entire life was going to stop being true, and he did not know what would be on the other side of that. Hermione came up at 10 o'clock. She sat beside him without asking why he was there. "Are you scared?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "I don't know what I am," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Below them the lake caught the starlight and held it. "Whatever happens to the scar," she said carefully, "you'll still be you." "You don't know that." "No," she said. "But I think it's true." They sat until 11. They went back inside. The Wardstone's pulse changed at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in June. Not urgently. It changed the way a room changes when a door opens somewhere else in the building, a shift in pressure, a quality of new air. Harry felt it in his sleep and was awake before he understood why. He lay still for 4 seconds. He listened to the castle. The castle told him 3 things. Something of significant dark magic had oriented itself toward the grounds. It was not inside the perimeter yet. And it was not alone. He dressed in the dark. He was in the corridor before Hermione's door opened, which meant she had felt it at approximately the same time, which had stopped surprising him in year 3. They did not speak on the way to the Wardstone chamber. The castle lit their path without drama, every door already open, every corridor already clear, the way a careful host ensures the table is set before the guests arrive. Snape was in the Wardstone chamber when they descended. He had prepared the extraction potion on the timeline they had agreed in March. He looked at Harry when they entered. He did not ask if Harry was ready. "He's at the perimeter," Harry said. "The outer wards are holding," Hermione said, her hands already at the Wardstone. "He's testing them. He'll find the gap," Harry said. She had been against the gap from the beginning. She had made the case in April across 2 evenings with documentation, the risk surface, the contingency failure modes, the specific calculation of what happened if the extraction window didn't open cleanly and Voldemort was already inside the grounds. She had laid it out with the precision of something she had built carefully and believed completely. Harry had listened to all of it. Then he had said, "If we make Hogwarts impenetrable, we hand him the timing. We don't know what vector he finds next. We know this one. We control this one." And she had sat with that for 2 days. Genuinely sat with it, running the numbers both directions. She had not changed her mind about the risk. She had changed her mind about which risk was larger. It was the only time in 5 years she had updated a conclusion against her own documentation, and she had told him so, and he had not celebrated it, which was the correct response. "There is a gap," she said. "South perimeter. He'll find it in approximately 11 minutes. Harry placed his hands on the ward stone beside hers. The aurora rose, sapphire, crimson, the peripheral emerald, the deep gold last. He did not rush it. The ward stone did not respond to urgency. It responded to clarity, and clarity required the ordinary pace. When the full aurora was present, they spoke the full sovereign command. Not loud. The charter specified it in terms Hermione had translated carefully and Harry had read 3 times. The full sovereign command is not a shout. It is a declaration spoken at the depth of the castle's own register, which is lower than the human voice ordinarily reaches, and which requires the regents to speak not from the throat, but from the foundation of their intent. They had practiced this in March. It had taken 11 attempts before the castle responded correctly. It responded correctly now. The castle woke. Every enchantment the founders had ever laid in the castle's architecture activated simultaneously. Every ward, every protection, every layer of magic dormant for 100 years or 500, active and present and oriented. The portraits sat up in their frames. The staircases locked. The Whomping Willow went still for 3 seconds, and then began to move in a way it had never moved before. Not random defensive thrashing, but something coordinated, working in concert with the trees at the forest's edge that Hufflepuff had planted in 991 AD, and that the castle had not called upon since the 2nd decade of its existence. Harry pulled his hands from the ward stone. He's through the perimeter. They stood in the courtyard. Snape was not with them. His role required him at the ward stone, managing the Death Eaters the castle was currently routing toward the forest's edge via the architectural persuasion that had worked on Quirrell in Year 1, and that worked significantly better when the castle was operating at full capacity. Voldemort came through the archway at 12:23 am. He came alone. Harry noted the deviation without changing his posture. Voldemort had assessed the situation accurately enough to understand that numbers were not the relevant variable here. He stopped when he saw them. He looked at the courtyard, at the castle's activated state visible in the quality of the air and the impossible torch colors. He looked at 2 15-year-olds standing in the center of the courtyard with the stillness of people who have been waiting. "Children," Voldemort said. "Hello, Tom," Harry said. The name landed. Harry watched it land, the specific response of someone who has spent decades excising a name from the world's usage and encounters it spoken plainly by someone who is not afraid. Not anger. Something more interior than anger. "You have interfered considerably," Voldemort said. "Yes," Harry said. "The tournament, my servant, the portkey." "We knew in October," Hermione said. "We let the plan develop until we understood it fully. Then we removed it." Voldemort looked at Harry. "You have no wand," he said. "No," Harry said. "Then this will be brief," Harry said. Yes, the killing curse crossed the courtyard. Harry did not move. The soul fragment in his scar recognized its parent consciousness arriving and surged toward the connection. It reached for Voldemort's magic the way a tributary reaches for a river. It found the extraction framework instead. Snape's potion, administered 3 hours earlier in the Wardstone chamber, had been preparing the fragment's boundary conditions since midnight. The Wardstone's constitutional memory, activated by the full sovereign command, held the extraction architecture in the castle's own structure. The 4-second window opened. Hermione spoke. Not a spell. The Charter's constitutional language, the specific old magic mode that made her words within the grounds legally and magically binding, directed at the soul fragment in its moment of movement. This piece is separated. This piece is not Tom Riddle. This piece returns to nothing. The fragment stopped. It did not rejoin Voldemort's consciousness. It did not remain in Harry's scar. It folded inward the way things without sufficient coherence to sustain themselves fold, not dramatically, the way a flame goes out when the fuel is consumed. It was there, and then it was not. Harry's scar went cold. Then it went quiet. He had not known it was loud. He had never had a point of comparison. It had always been there. A frequency so constant it had become part of the texture of being himself. The way you stop hearing a clock that has been in the room your whole life. He heard the clock stop. The silence where the fragment had been was not peaceful, it was structural. The way a room feels wrong when a wall has been removed, too much air where there should be resistance. He stood in it and tried to find himself in it, and the finding was harder than he had expected. Because for 15 years he had been built around something he had not known was there. He catalogued what remained. His own heartbeat, faster than usual, which made sense. The cold of the courtyard on his face. The ache in his left knee from where he had gone down on it. The ward stone's pulse through the ground. 4 seconds, steady. He had thought, without letting himself think it directly, that the removal might feel like relief. Like the fever morning, like arithmetic resolving cleanly. It did not feel like that. It felt like reading a word you have read 10,000 times and suddenly not knowing if you were reading it correctly. His magic was still there, warm and present, nothing missing in any direction he checked. His memories were intact. He was not less. But the frequency the fragment had occupied, the specific hum that had been the texture of his own consciousness since before he could form memories of it, was simply gone. And the goneness was enormous, and he did not know yet what it meant to be himself without it. He stood in the courtyard with Voldemort 6 meters away, and let himself not know for 3 full seconds. Then, Hermione's hand was on his arm, brief and present, and he felt the ward stone's resonance through the contact, her steadiness, her certainty, the quality of someone who has run every number on this moment from every angle and arrived here anyway. Then, himself. The silence lasted 1 second. 2. Then Voldemort moved. Not a curse. Harry had expected a curse and was braced for it, and Voldemort knew this the way he knew most things about Harry, which was through 11 years of unwanted intimacy, and he did not give Harry what he was braced for. He pushed. Legitimacy without warning, without incantation, a hard lateral intrusion through the gap the fragment's departure had left open. A wound where a wall had been, and Voldemort found it in the same instant Harry did. Harry went down on one knee. It was not pain exactly. It was exposure. The specific vertigo of a door blown open in a room you had believed sealed, cold air coming through fast. Voldemort moved through it looking for something to hold, something to use. The specific search of someone who has lost their leverage and is looking for new leverage in the same motion. He found the ward stone's resonance and recoiled from it. He found Hermione's presence and pushed toward it. Harry, her voice was level. She had not moved. She was watching him and watching Voldemort, and her right hand was at the constitutional text she had carried in her inner pocket since March, folded, ready. Harry put his hand on the ground. The castle's pulse came through his palm. 4 seconds, steady, unchanged. He pushed back. Not with a spell, with the ward stone's resonance. The full constitutional weight of 5 years of legitimate authority built into the ground's own architecture, which Voldemort had no counter for because it was not magic in the tradition he had mastered. It was older. It was the hill itself saying, "Not here. Not this." Voldemort's intrusion hit the resonance and scattered. Harry stood up. His hands were shaking. He put them at his sides and they stopped. Mostly, the fragment, Voldemort said. His voice had changed, a quality Harry had not heard in it before, which was the quality of someone recalculating from a position they had believed secure. "You extracted it." "February," Harry said. Snape developed the procedure. Voldemort looked at him, then at Hermione. The look was assessment, not fury. He had moved past fury into the colder register that lived behind it. He did not fire. He was reassessing. Voldemort had felt it. The fragment's dissolution registered as a loss, small, given how fragmented he had already become, but registered. "The Horcruxes," he said slowly. Destroyed, Hermione said. Snape began in year 3. The last one was the locket. In February. You have been mortal since February. Voldemort looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something Harry had not prepared for. He did not attack Harry. He did not attack Hermione. He turned his wand on the Wardstone's resonance itself, the architectural frequency Harry had used to push him back, now visible to him as a structural pattern. Something to be unraveled rather than overcome. The spell was not one Harry recognized. It was old, pre-wand, the kind of working that required a caster who had spent decades learning to damage things at their foundations rather than their surfaces. The Wardstone's pulse stuttered. 1 beat. 4 seconds became 6. The castle's 4-second rhythm, unchanged since the night they first felt it. Skipped. Harry felt it the way you feel a heartbeat skip in someone you were holding. Not pain. Something worse than pain. The sudden awareness of how much you have been relying on something continuing. Harry looked at Hermione. It was the only time in 5 years he had seen her face do what it did in that moment. Not panic. Not calculation. But the specific expression of someone whose preparation has reached its edge and who is standing at the boundary of what they planned for. 1 second. 2, she spoke. Not the Charter's constitutional language, something older, the mode she had found in the 14th alcove's text and practiced in the vault for 6 weeks without telling Harry, because she had not known if it would work and had not wanted him to plan around a contingency she wasn't certain of. The castle's own language directed back at its own architecture, not a command. A reminder. This is what you are. This is what you were built from. This is the pulse. The Wardstone's rhythm corrected. 4 seconds. Steady, unchanged, Voldemort looked at Hermione. The expression on his face was the one Harry had not seen before and would not see again, something that was not fury and was not calculation, but was the specific quality of someone encountering, for the first and last time, a preparation they had not known to account for. The castle spoke, not in English. Not in Old English or Parcel Tongue or any language in human use, since the wand tradition replaced what came before it. It spoke in the language the founders had used when they built the first stone, the old magic in its primary form, pre-linguistic, structural, the magic that matter itself responded to because it was the magic matter was built from. 1 declaration. 3 seconds. Tom Riddle heard the castle reject him. Not his magic, not his plans, him, the specific fact of his continued presence, in a place that had constitutional memory of everything he had done within its walls, and the legitimate authority to declare that presence void. He had no protection. He had not had protection since February. He had a body built from ritual and sustained by dark magic, and the castle's old magic, at full activation, recognized it as having no right to exist within these grounds. It did not look like anything. One moment Tom Riddle was standing in the courtyard. Then the castle had spoken. Then he was not. The courtyard was very still. Harry stood in it without moving. The torches burned in their nameless colors. The Wardstone's pulse came through the ground, slow, 4-second rhythm, unchanged from every other night of the past 5 years. The castle was not celebrating. It had done what it was built to do. It was simply continuing. Hermione stood beside him. She did not say anything immediately, and he did not require her to. "It's done," she said. "Finally, yeah," Harry said. A pause. The torches. The stone. The 4-second pulse. "He said children," Hermione said. "I know. That was his last mistake." She looked up at the castle, the towers catching the June night, the old stone doing what old stone does, which is endure. He thought he was coming back to a school. Harry looked up at it too. "He forgot," Harry said, "that we live here." The vault of the architects looked the same as it always had. It was July. The term had ended. The castle held its summer population, a smaller, quieter constellation on the living map. Staff and students who stayed, and creatures going about their business without the overlay of 600 young people learning things. The wider world had taken time to find its new shape. Fudge had resigned in the spring following Voldemort's fall, before the Wizengamot Review of Ministry Conduct was formally concluded. His successor was Rufus Scrimgeour, who had served as head of the Auror Office and who approached Hogwarts with the wariness of a man who had spent his career learning not to underestimate things he didn't fully understand. He had read the full Sovereign Declaration and requested a meeting with the regents in his first week of office. The meeting had been specific and productive, and had produced a formal memorandum of understanding that both parties signed without significant amendment. The ministry did not attempt to enter Hogwarts without notification again. Lucius Malfoy's formal investigation had concluded with findings the Wizengamot described as extensive and consequential. He was fined significantly. He was publicly and permanently without institutional standing. He had become, in the specific way of people who have built their identity entirely on position, someone who had lost the architecture of himself. Draco Malfoy was working out what he was instead, which was slower and less dramatic and more real. "We should probably think about succession," Hermione said. She did not look up from her notebook. She said it in the same tone she used for all significant things, which was the same tone she used for everything. "Probably," Harry agreed. "The charter says the Wardstone will recognize a new pair eventually. The process is automatic. We don't select them. The castle arranges the conditions and the pair finds the vault the same way we did." "The breathing book," Harry said. "The breathing book," she confirmed. "The castle will know what works." Harry looked at the map. Sirius's light moved in the grounds. On Tuesday afternoons he rode the hippogriffs in a way Madame Hooch had described as technically proficient and temperamentally irresponsible, which Sirius had accepted as a reasonable assessment. Sirius was on the low stone wall near the greenhouses when Harry came out in the late afternoon. He had a cup of tea, something Pomfrey had recommended, and that had become, quietly, a thing he did on days when the castle felt most like home. He looked better than he had a year ago. Harry noted this without saying it, because Sirius did not need it said. They sat in silence for a while. The lake held the light. "James would have had opinions," Sirius said. "He would have been insufferable about it," Harry said. Then, quieter, "He did inspire me, though. Indirectly, he loved this castle. You all did. The Marauders understood it better than anyone except maybe the Founders. That's part of why it recognized me." Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then, he would have been so annoying about that. Harry laughed, which was what Sirius had intended. Evening came slowly in July. Harry went back to the vault as the light changed. Hermione was still at the table, but the notebook was closed now, which meant she had reached a stopping point or the specific state of completion that she recognized even when it arrived unexpectedly. She looked up when he came down the spiral staircase. "Do you ever think about the library?" she asked. "The restricted section." "The breathing book," Harry said, "the 2 inches of gap." He looked at the map's center where their lights held their ordinary brightness, not the blazing revelation of the first night, but steady, present, the light of things that have been burning long enough to know their own temperature. "I think about how easily it doesn't happen. If I come to the library on a different night, if you come to a different shelf, the castle would have found another way," Hermione said. "Probably," Harry said. "But it found this one." She looked at him with the expression she wore when she had fully formed something and was deciding whether the moment was right for it. "You were already everything you needed to be," she said, "before the Wardstone, before the charter. The castle didn't make you the regent, it recognized that you already were one. There's a difference." He looked at the map. "We both were," he said. She looked back at her notebook. She opened it to a new page. She began to write. The castle breathed its 4-second pulse beneath them, slow and certain and unchanged from the first night they had felt it, unchanged from the night the founders had laid the first stone and asked the hill to become something, and the hill had agreed. The memory pensieve turned in its basin. The 4 lights held their corners. The charter lay on the black stone table between them, open to no particular page, available to whatever question came next. Somewhere above them, in the corridors and the classrooms and the grounds and the lake, the castle continued. Students who did not yet know what they were. Magic that had not yet found its form. Rooms that had not yet been needed. The castle knew how to wait. It had always known how to wait. It had learned, over 1,000 years, that the right people always found the vault eventually. They always touched the right spine at the right moment. They always came in pairs, one hand and another, and the wall always opened, and the map always showed them who they were before they had any words for it. It would happen again. Not soon. But eventually, on some future evening, in some future week of term, 2 lights would appear at the center of the living map brighter than everything around them, and the castle would recognize what it was looking at. And it would do what it had always done. It would wait to be found. It was very good at this. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.